There is a silence more powerful than 1,000 declarations. A calm that doesn't come from peace, but from dominion. And you only find it when you stop reacting. You've been trained to respond to every glance, every opinion, every piece of news, every slight, every shift in tone. You were taught that being quick meant being sharp, that reacting fast was the mark of intelligence. But reacting isn't intelligence. Reacting is slavery. It is the involuntary twitch of a man still chained to the world's approval. It is the nervous dance of someone who has never anchored themselves in who they truly are. Because when you react to everything, you belong to everything. You are a puppet pulled by invisible threads. Social media, gossip, headlines, the moods of others. You are not leading. You are being led, and you cannot lead from reaction. You cannot build empires on emotional impulse. Carl Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But fate is not destiny. Fate is what happens when you live unconsciously. When you respond to the world instead of recreating it. To lead, you must interrupt the pattern. You must meet stimulus not with reflex, but with stillness. Stillness, not passivity. Stillness, the kind that precedes precise, lethal movement. Like a lion who watches longer than he strikes. Like a general who waits for the storm to settle before drawing the map. Stillness is not weakness. It is the signature of those who rule themselves. And a man who rules himself becomes unrulable by anyone else. That is when you begin to lead, when you no longer chase, when you no longer answer every pull on your attention, when you no longer bleed energy into things that do not build your becoming. You become dangerous the moment you no longer need to respond, because your silence becomes unpredictable. Your stillness becomes unnerving. And in a world addicted to immediate reactions, the man who pauses becomes the man who commands. And that pause, that sacred moment between trigger and response, is where the entire game shifts. That pause is where the boy ends and the sovereign begins, where the reactive dies and the strategic is born, where you stop being a mirror and become the light. This is the first truth. Leadership doesn't begin with control of others. It begins with control of self. And self-control doesn't mean repression. It means command. It means becoming the architect of your own inner weather. It means standing in the middle of chaos and not flinching, because you are the storm's center, not its victim. Every great leader you've ever admired wasn't the loudest, wasn't the fastest, wasn't the one who reacted first. They were the stillest, the clearest, the most calculated in their restraint. And now it's your turn to build that within yourself. Not with words, with wiring, not with emotion, with identity. Because the moment you stop reacting, you stop being a pawn. You become the board. You stop chasing moments. You start shaping momentum. And suddenly, the world begins to pivot around you. Not because you forced it, because you became immovable. And in that immovability, you became undeniable. And when you become undeniable, you don't need to speak to be heard. You don't need to move to be followed. You don't need to shout commands, because your presence is the command. This is what leadership looks like in its truest, rawest form. A man so deeply rooted in his own psyche that the storms of the world pass around him, not through him. He doesn't flinch. He frames. He doesn't react to pressure. He restructures pressure into progress. Because when you stop reacting, you see everything for what it really is. Disrespect becomes data. Resistance becomes a mirror. Chaos becomes opportunity. And judgment? Judgment becomes silence. Because nothing outside you holds authority anymore. You don't need to fight back. Because you've already won within. And when you've won within, no one else's words can reach the battlefield you've already conquered. This is not arrogance. This is integration. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And when you awaken, you stop reacting to the dreams of others. You begin to shape your own reality with surgical precision. You stop apologizing for your pace. You stop defending your standard. You stop giving explanations to people who have never earned your depth, because now you lead by movement, by stillness, by choice. You're no longer triggered by noise, because you've trained your nervous system to obey your vision. Every breath becomes intentional. Every step becomes directional. Every decision becomes final. Because leaders don't repeat themselves. They don't explain the fire. They carry it. And that's what you are now. A fire, not loud, not wild, but controlled, directed, relentless. You burn, not to destroy, but to purify, to clear the path, to reveal the truth, to make space for what must rise from the ashes of your former reactivity. You're not here to be triggered. You're here to be the trigger, to be the beginning of something different in every room you enter. And that only happens when your internal world stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a fortress. Build the fortress, not out of stone, but out of self-command, out of the discipline to pause before you react, to breathe before you strike, to decide before you respond. Because from that place, the world doesn't control you. You lead it, not with ego, but with presence. And presence doesn't flinch. It frames. It frames everything through the lens of purpose, of mission, of a man who no longer plays tug of war with his emotions, but channels them with precision. Because now, you've seen what reaction costs. You've felt the drain. You've tasted the regret. You know the weight of snapping too quickly, speaking too soon, chasing shadows. And you're done bleeding power into temporary relief. You've replaced it with clarity. You've chosen the still blade over the scattered noise. You've become the man who doesn't need to be understood, only to be accurate. You see it in your relationships. You speak less, but say more. You walk away not out of pride, but out of precision. You don't escalate arguments. You end them internally. Not because you're weak, but because your energy is too expensive to waste. You become immune to the bait, the drama, the projection, because you've gone to war with your own chaos and won. And now you lead, not by title, not by loudness, but by gravity. The way planets don't follow the sun because it screams, they follow it because it doesn't move. That's your new identity. That's what the pause gave you. That sacred second between trigger and reaction became a doorway, a portal to your final form. And now you carry that frequency. People feel it. They can't always name it, but they feel the shift, the depth, the quiet. It commands, it corrects, it leads without asking. You're no longer in rooms to be liked. You're in rooms to raise the standard, to make mediocrity uncomfortable, to make direction non-negotiable, to bring weight into spaces still floating in distraction. And the secret? You do it all without ever needing to react. Because now you know The man who reacts belongs to the room. But the man who pauses, observes, and then speaks with intention, the room belongs to him. And once that's who you become, you never look back, because the cost of reaction is too high. And the return on leadership is infinite, because once you taste true leadership, not the kind given, but the kind earned in silence, you'll never again sell yourself to the small gods of reaction. You'll feel the pull, the itch to defend, to respond, to clap back. But you won't, because now your dignity is worth more than momentary satisfaction. Your focus is worth more than fleeting validation. Your stillness is a throne you won't step down from just to prove you're right. You don't lead by reacting to chaos. You lead by becoming the antidote to it. In your family, in your business, in every room you walk into, you become the axis. You become the one who doesn't just hold space, you define it. And that space you hold, it becomes your influence. It becomes your invitation. Not to be followed, but to be felt. Because the man who no longer reacts is rare. And rare becomes revered. Not because he asked for it, but because the world has no choice but to bend around the one who cannot be bent. You've shifted now. Not slightly. Fundamentally. You're no longer a man who lets emotion lead logic. You're a man whose logic is rooted in mission. And that mission is clear. To build, to embody, to lead, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. When emotions scream, you pause. When insult hits, you frame. When chaos erupts, you hold. Not because you're cold, but because you're centered. And the man who is centered becomes the compass for everyone who lost theirs. You don't say much anymore, because you don't have to. Your actions carry weight. Your silence cuts through the fog. Your leadership begins where their noise ends. You become the proof, not of perfection, but of possession, self-possession, presence, power. And from this place, you don't need to convince anyone to follow. They feel it. They choose it. Because when you stop reacting, you don't just lead. You become inevitable. And when you become inevitable, you no longer chase results. They gather around you certainty. You no longer strive to be seen. Because presence makes you unmissable. You no longer beg for alignment, because everything out of alignment repels itself. This is where leadership becomes destiny. Not because you declared it, but because you endured for it. You passed the test that breaks most men. The test of reaction. Most fail. Most take the bait. Most get triggered and trade their crown for a comment section. But not you. Not anymore. Because you've learned the most powerful man in the room is not the loudest. He's the one who doesn't flinch. He's the one whose energy governs without speaking. And the reason he governs is because he governs himself. He doesn't need attention. He commands respect. He doesn't demand loyalty. He walks in such alignment that loyalty isn't even a question. That's who you are now. Not becoming being. You've built a mind that's no longer hijacked by emotion. You've built an identity that doesn't shatter under criticism. You've built a system within yourself that doesn't collapse when the external world shakes. And now you lead. Not someday, not hypothetically, but every time you choose not to react, every time you respond to his principle, every time you move with precision, every time you hold the standard without broadcasting it. That's leadership. That's transformation. That's the moment your name stops being just another profile and becomes a pillar. Because the man who masters his reactions masters his reality. And the world, whether it knows it or not, is dying for that kind of man to rise. Now it's you. And now you don't explain it. You embody it. They'll feel it and they'll follow. Not because you shouted, but because you stopped reacting and started leading. Because once you lead from this place, you no longer ask the world for your role. You establish it. Not through aggression, but through alignment. Not through manipulation, but through magnetism. You attract not what you want, but what matches your frame. Your relationships change, because now you won't settle for partners who pull you off center. Your business changes, because now your vision is too clear to entertain distractions. Your legacy changes, because now you move with long-term gravity, not short-term noise. And the world begins to shift around you, not because you forced it, but because you refuse to flinch. This is the new you, not a trend, not a season, not a strategy, but a structure built from unshakable presence, reinforced by delayed reaction, fueled by discipline, fortified by truth. You now live in a different frequency, one where leaders don't chase outcomes, they engineer environments, one where emotion doesn't drive decision, but serves it, where every word, every breath, every move carries weight. You're not here to be fast. You're here to be final. You're not here to prove. You're here to position. You're not here to compete. You're here to command. And when they ask, when did you become this? How did you change everything? You will answer without explanation. Not with stories, not with speeches, but with presence. Still, grounded, immovable. Because the moment you stopped reacting was the moment everything began to obey your leadership. And from that day forward, you never looked back, because there's nothing left to look back at. You've crossed the threshold now. You no longer identify with a man who spiraled at every trigger, who danced to the rhythm of other people's chaos, who lost hours, days, years reacting to fires he didn't start and had no business putting out. That man is gone, buried beneath the weight of every choice you made to pause instead of panic, to observe instead of explode, to build instead of break. And in his place stands you, not the surface you, not the social you, but the final you, the one forged by pressure, calibrated by clarity, and released only when the boy inside finally stepped aside for the king to rise. You don't just lead now, you govern. Your presence makes statements you no longer need to say. Your energy enters rooms minutes before your body does. Your silence holds more tension than most people's noise. Because now you've built your core. You've trained your nervous system. You've reconciled with your shadow. And that's the kind of leadership no one can imitate, because it wasn't learned. It was earned. So let them ask what you're doing differently. Let them speculate. Let them wonder how you became so calm, so clear, so damn centered in a world that profits off distraction. You won't need to answer, because the truth is simple. You stopped reacting and you started leading, consistently, quietly, irreversibly. And now the world follows. Not because you demanded it, but because you became undeniable. And that is how a man rewrites his story. Not with reaction, but with relentless self-leadership. The throne is yours now, not because they gave it to you, because you stopped waiting and you became it. And once you become the throne, you don't sit on it for recognition. You stand from it to serve. Not to serve ego, not to serve applause, but to serve order in a world that worships chaos. To serve truth in a culture addicted to performance. To serve vision in a generation that fears silence. You are no longer here to prove that you can lead. You are here to restore the meaning of leadership itself. You are not here to be the loudest voice in the room. You are here to be the frequency no one can ignore. Not because you scream, but because you don't move. You don't fold. You don't negotiate with distraction. You don't explain your standards to people who sold theirs years ago. You lead through essence. You build through calm. You move with reverence for the weight of your name. And when you speak, it is because something must be said, not because you needed to fill the silence, because you became the silence they could no longer run from. This is your final form, not some perfect curated avatar, but the man who owns his peace so completely. The world either rises to match it or disappears in its presence. You've stopped reacting. You've stopped leaking power. You've stopped handing out explanations like currency. And now the only thing you give is direction. Through posture, through presence, through every inch of restraint that says, I don't need to fight you. I am the war you won't survive. So lead with dignity, with depth, with the full force of a man who rewired his soul, retrained his instinct, and reclaimed every part of himself that once flinched at the world. You are the axis now, the example, the man who made stillness into a sword and silence into a strategy. And from this moment forward, you will never lead the way you once did, because now you lead not by reaction, but by reality. Yours, unshaken, unbought, unstoppable. This is where it ends. Not your rise, but your response to everything that was never worthy of it. This is where the boy's reflexes are buried, where the compulsive need to react is laid to rest, where the old identity, the one that jumped at every opinion, snapped at every threat, defended every inch of unclaimed ground, is burned. And in its ashes, a man who leads, not because he has to, but because he is, no more justifying, no more explaining, no more reacting. From now on, your breath will say more than their noise ever could. Your gaze will quiet rooms. Your decisions will shape empires. And your stillness will move mountains. You are no longer reacting. You are leading. And the world, it will follow. Not because you asked it to, but because now it has no other choice.